We're in the end game now.
For season one at least. This show ran for 4 seasons, but I'm stopping here. Hello, my name is Garvin, and I read things and natter about them on the internet for your entertainment. Welcome back to the wrap-up of Dick Month, everyone, where I look at the works and adaptations of Philip K. Dick. Today, we are ending season 1 of The Man in the High Castle. We're going to discuss episodes 7 through 10, and this is the last episode of Dick Month for 2025. That said, this is going to be a long one, folks. I have a lot to talk about, so buckle up. So, just about all 3 of our main characters make what I feel at least are really bad decisions. And I'm going to start with Joe. At the end of episode 6, he's basically caught in John Smith, his boss's office, snooping on secret files. And I'm sorry, the reason I consider that horrible judgment is Smith was telegraphing to Joe through little comments and actions throughout the whole thing that, hey, I'm watching you. Come on, Joe. You just watched him set up another man to be arrested while eating a family dinner with him and you right there. It's very clear this dude is running on several levels and he's ahead of you. And you think you could just walk into his private office and read classified files? It was a setup. I understand Joe is being driven by this need to know what's going on with these films, but his lack of awareness and basic self-preservation instincts are incredibly frustrating for me. Just as a brief aside note, I want to say that John Smith's actor, Rufus Sewell, does an amazing job, has this honestly terrifying character. But we'll circle back to John Smith in a minute. I'm not done with Joe. Because of Joe's screw-ups, Smith basically forces him at gunpoint to take another mission, which means calling Juliana and heading out to San Francisco to try and intercept another one of these films. To make things worse, we find out that Joe already has a girlfriend and a kid he's basically adopted. And to give credit to the show, they're able to establish in 2 minutes that Joe is actually a really good father figure. He helps the kid with his homework, encourages him when he gets a B+, supports the kid when he finds out he's being bullied. If Joe just stayed home and was a good boyfriend and a good father to this kid, he'd be doing fine, but he's getting pulled into this because of his terrible life choices, and it's gonna hurt more than him. His girlfriend's name is Rita, and she clearly cares about him and doesn't like him being away from home, which, given that she lives in Nazi-occupied America, I can't blame her. At this point, though, Joe doesn't have a choice because John Smith is also subtly threatening Rita and her son to motivate Joe to do what he's told, because John Smith is a Nazi. Do not work with these people. You put everyone you care about at risk when you do that just to start with. Never mind everything else on the list of why you shouldn't work with Nazis. There's also that. Sorry for that tangent, folks. Let's get back to the television show. Because Joe isn't the only one making bad life decisions. Juliana, for example, discovered last episode that her stepfather is working for the Japanese, listening to phone calls and recording anything that seems subversive. She does tell Frank when he comes home from a sort of impromptu Jewish memorial service for his sister and her kids, and they make up over the fight they had before he left, which is good.
She also confronts her stepfather, which I'm not sure was a great idea, but she didn't have a lot of choice in that. And she learns that he actually sold out her sister Trudy, but the Japanese told him that they were going to let her escape to the neutral zone. Well, this bubble is burst when Julia gets information from Tagomi, her quote-unquote boss and Japanese trade minister, and the information leads her to an open mass grave in the California countryside with Trudy's body in it, which more points to the show for not shying away from the brutality of a imperialist colonial occupation here. But man, I would tell you to watch the show just for that scene, because it really hits. Frank, meanwhile, has basically had enough of the Pacific states, so he goes to a businessman named Robert Chilton. Now, Robert is a big character in the book, but in the show has played a fairly minor role, only really selling Frank's bullets that Frank never used. Frank shows up to his shop and goes, "I want to sell you fake guns." But Robert had his pride injured because a Japanese couple invited him to dinner, leading him on thinking that this would be, a long-term friendship, and just kind of dropped him. And he wants to get back at them by selling them a fake Native American artifact, which adds layers to this whole exploration of how colonizers get obsessed with the cultures and artifacts of the people they're colonizing and how they loot that. I could go on for a while on that because I was trained as an anthropologist, but I'm just going to leave that where it is. In this case, they make a replica of a piece of jewelry, kind of a necklace that's sitting bull-war. And this works, and Frank gets enough money to get him and Juliana out of the Pacific states and somewhere where they can lead safer and hopefully happier lives. This, of course, doesn't happen. The very night that she and Frank are supposed to leave, she's told by her stepfather that the Japanese secret police are raiding the club where Joe is buying the film back from the Yakuza. So Juliana drops everything, runs out there to save Joe, and gets kidnapped by the Yakuza along with Joe. She does manage to save him from the Japanese secret police, though, so there's that. The Resistance has enough money to basically ransom Juliana back, and she then talks Frank into using the money that they're supposed to be using to flee away from all of this to save Joe. Frank's not happy about this, but considering Joe saved Juliana's life and he knows that, I feel like he went along with it because he felt like he owed Joe one, which is a fair thing to think. Of course, he goes with his gun because he's meeting a bunch of Japanese mobsters and he's scared. And when he's there, keep in mind, Joe can't go back to the East Coast without this film. If he does, not only is he dead, but his adopted son and his girlfriend are dead. So he grabs Frank's gun and just blasts the Japanese mobsters, steals the film, and grabs Joe and books it, which means Joe and Frank have not only pissed off the Japanese secret police, but the Japanese mob, and Frank doesn't have any money to leave with. Thanks, Juliana. Okay, that's not fair to her, but she keeps dragging him into this stuff. Well, it's kind of funny because that film that Joe killed the mobsters over, when Frank and Juliana get a chance to watch it, it's a film of Frank and a bunch of other guys being executed in the bombed out ruins of San Francisco by Joe in an SS uniform surrounded by other Nazis. Imagine you gave up your life savings to free a guy, and you find out he's an SS agent who might execute you in the future. How would you feel? Just, wow. Well, the Resistance figures out, hey, Joe's probably not a real Resistance member. He's probably a Nazi. So they ask Giuliano to lure Joe out so that they can kill him and get the film. Not only has she seen him murder Frank on film, she finds him in the Nazi embassy. And she still lets him go. She helps him escape the Resistance trap because he gives her a tearful speech. I'm sorry, these are terrible decisions she's making. And a lot of these decisions boil down to she doesn't want to feel like she's hurt anybody. But all of these decisions get more people hurt. She's basically passing off the cost of these moral decisions to others. Basically deciding, if I don't see the harm or directly cause it, then it didn't happen and I'm not responsible. I don't find this a good trait. I find this very irresponsible and very short-sighted. And from what I'm getting in the show, I'm supposed to approve of this because I don't see the cost on screen. But 2 minutes of thought leads you to the conclusion that covering for Arnold and saving Joe means that Frank and good people in the Resistance, or not even in the Resistance, just people who are talking about things that the Japanese secret police don't approve of, are going to get hurt. And Juliana is helping that happen. Speaking of people getting hurt, let me touch on what the bad guys are up to. Because John Smith is getting his own bad news. His son has a medical condition that will lead to basically being paralyzed. And in the Reich, this is treated by killing you. And this is tearing John Smith up because he's a monster, but he does love his children. Now, I'm not that sympathetic to him because he was happy to murder plenty of other people's kids, and not that long ago he was making threats to Joe's adopted son. So it's sort of, what can I say? But I do feel bad for John Smith's boy, who hasn't done anything and is just this good kid trying to make an undeserving father proud. Kid doesn't deserve any of this, but neither did any of the Nazis' victims, did they? This is already a pretty bad day for John Smith, but it's gonna get worse, because he finds himself in the middle of a coup. A higher Nazi official named Heydrich, which was the real name of the guy who came up with the plan for the actual Holocaust, by the way, drops by New York. In this timeline, he not only did the, quote, final, unquote, solution, but also apparently, and I quote the show, re-enslaved Africa. Yikes. I don't know what else to say. Just, this timeline is terrifying. Heydrich pulls Wagner out of jail and tells him, hey, do me a favor. Get dressed up in your uniform, fly back to Berlin, and kill Hitler so that Heydrich can seize power, in exchange promising to protect Wagner's family, and then start World War III. He doesn't tell Wagner that part. Now, to nail down everything, after he sends Wagner off on his kamikaze run, if I can be permitted to use the term, he turns around and invites John Smith to go hunting. Alone in the woods, just him, John Smith, Heydrich's terrifyingly lethal aide. And what's interesting is that even Smith's wife, Helen, is picking up on the bad vibes, and she has been playing
stereotypical clueless housewife this whole time, and she practically begs John Smith not to go. Heydrich is supposedly a hero of this nation, and Helen, a high-placed wife of a high-placed official in this nation, does not want her husband or her family alone with this man. That says things, doesn't it? John Smith calms her down, and then after, kind of laughing off the idea that Heydrich would kill him, hands his wife a loaded pistol, making her promise that if he doesn't come home, do not let that man near their kids. I don't even know what to say to that. Just, this timeline is terrifying. So, while John Smith is, let's call it, making arrangements for his family, Wagner has reached Berlin and goes to see his family one last time before doing his murder-suicide. And his wife isn't entirely thrilled to see him because he's been an incredibly absent father and husband, to say the least. And what I find interesting here is he doesn't make excuses, he doesn't deny anything or go, well, blah, blah, blah. He just admits to it, takes responsibility, and says, you're right, I have been a lousy husband. I wish there was time to make up for it, and all I can say is I'm really sorry for everything. Which profoundly disturbs his wife. She realizes, oh no, something is about to go really wrong here, and there's nothing I can do. He then proceeds to confront Hitler, and we find him watching films of other timelines where the Reich falls. And Hitler knows exactly why he's here, and he confronts Wagner with this. Hey, Heydrich wants me dead so he can start World War III with the Japanese and kill millions more people. So, buddy, if you shoot me, you will have the blood of millions of more people on your hands. And I just have to take a moment here to go, how empty and awful of a person do you have to be to have gone through World War II, created the Holocaust, enslave a continent, and then turn around and go, you know what the problem is? Not enough people have died yet. We need World War III. We're at the point where Adolf Hitler is saying, you know what? There's been enough violence. It's time to stop. Just how? How have we reached the point where Hitler is the guy saying enough people have died? This timeline, whoa. Well, Hitler tells Wagner that, hey, if instead of shooting me, you shoot yourself, your family will be okay. I will take care of them. And Wagner can't take the responsibility of World War III, so Hitler lives another day. And it's a testament to just how screwed up this timeline is that's the good ending. Meanwhile, John Smith was taken at gunpoint by Heydrich and forced to wait in an isolated cabin for a phone call confirming Hitler was dead. At which point, since John Smith refused to swear loyalty to Heydrich, he was going to be killed. Instead, Hitler makes the phone call, explains to Heydrich he's screwed, and then guys that John Smith brought into the woods ambush them and capture Heydrich. This whole thing is just really dark and kind of intense. And I was just gut punched by the idea that Hitler is the least bad option here. Just, whew. I am giving this show a lot of points for just refusing to veer away from the consequences. That's something. With that, let's leave the Nazis behind and turn to our Japanese bad guys, like Inspector Kido, who has found the man who shot the Crown Prince, which is another Nazi agent working for Heydrich, and he's willing to confess everything because that'll kickstart World War III. Kido's not willing to have that on his hands, so he just shoots the Nazi and covers everything up. Because the other option is a war that will kill millions, and the Japanese can't win that war. Now, I will flat out admit, preventing World War III is a good thing that Kido has done. But the big reason he's stopping this war from happening is he knows the Japanese Empire won't win. And I'm left wondering, if there was, like, say, a 50-50 shot that the Japanese could take on the Nazis, would Kido have still shot that Nazi agent? You guys tell me. Now, to be fair to Kido, covering up the Nazi agent's crime means that he will have to kill himself. Because if he doesn't make an arrest at a certain time, Tokyo is going to demand his head on a plate. In this case, very literally. Kido's plan was to arrest Frank, who was at the scene with a gun, and just kind of pin the crime on him. But he hasn't been able to arrest Frank. Unfortunately, Frank's best friend, Ed, is caught with the gun Frank made and ends up confessing to the crime, saving Kido's life. Kido won't have to die. Ed is going to die. So let me just make it clear. Kido is willing to execute a man he knows is innocent, and that was always the plan. It's just the plan was dependent on Frank. Ed showing up, getting caught, and confessing was just a nice cherry on top of the sundae as far as Kido is concerned. I am not a fan of Inspector Kido. I do not think this is a good dude. I think he's an interesting antagonist, but I don't like the guy. Now, I haven't talked about the character Ed, who is Frank's best friend from his factory job, and he's been kind of throughout the background in the story. And this is kind of like his big jump into the forefront. And honestly, he, when I think about it, has been the best man in this story. At every step, he has tried to stop his friends from doing things that could hurt them and tried to protect and aid them in any way he can. And at the end of episode 10, we learn how far he's willing to go to do that, confessing to shooting the Crown Prince so Frank and Juliana will be safe. And unlike Juliana, Ed is taking the cost of these decisions onto himself, not passing it off to strangers. And that, in my eyes, makes him the more moral character. Because, well, to quote maybe one of the most quoted passages of all times, John chapter 15, verse 13, "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." Frank finds out about this, and episode 10 ends with Frank rushing into the secret police station, screaming at Kido to take him instead as Ed is dragged off in chains. So, let me sum it up here. As an adaptation, The Man in the High Castle changes a lot of things. The whole resistance movement, that's not really a thing in the book. That's something the showmakers kind of made up themselves.
and there are changes in the relationship and the ages of the characters. So, as an adaptation, I would rate it a C minus. As a standalone work, season one, and I'm only grading season one here, is a B. And the reason it's not higher is because it ends on a cliffhanger, and I have no intention of continuing to season two, and that shouldn't be taken as a mark on the show. Because the show is very interesting, it's very compelling, but it's on a personal level really draining for me to watch. And I'm not even trying to be political. I know I've made some political snapshots here, but it's not current events. That plays a small part in it, but no. Honestly, for me, it's something maybe smaller, but more personal and visceral. Let me go back. You remember that scene with the falling ash? And Joe's being told that today is the day they burn people instead of letting them be, quote, drains on the state? My parents are deaf. Both of them. For those of you who might not grasp what that means, in such a nation, my parents are murdered as infants, and my siblings and I never exist. And this whole thing about being drains on the state kind of hits because my parents took care of themselves for most of their lives. Hell, they probably used less state benefits than most hearing people. But growing up, because they can't hear, and people forgot that I could, I know they were constantly belittled, snickered at, and dismissed their whole lives as not being ever capable of actually being adults. The biggest damn obstacle in my parents' lives hasn't been their deafness. It's been hearing society fighting them at every step as they try to make something of themselves. The out-of-hand dismissal of them having any ability or knowledge or even just any human worth from just not everybody, but more than you would think. And every time a Nazi character, whether it's one of the SS characters, John Smith, or even just little suburban housewife Helen, opens their damn mouths, all I can think of is it's not enough for people like this to slap down people like my parents and mock them. They gotta murder them before they even get a chance to live. And that hits different. I'm not trying to say it hits me worse than someone who's maybe Jewish or someone who is deaf and knows that they're looking at a timeline where they would be killed. But for me personally, it hits pretty hard because I have run into people who have suggested that those who are deaf or blind or suffering from various, disabilities would be better off when they couldn't suffer anymore. And those people are usually shocked that I respond so negatively to that. And I'll never forget one instance that dissolved into a screaming fight with someone who really should have known better. Because I will never forget their wide-eyed, shocked deer expression that I could be so angry at the idea that my parents were better off dead. And their response, and I get this response for a lot of conversations like this, is, hey, this isn't anything personal. Well, when it's your parents or people you love.
It kind of feels personal.
So, yeah, despite how well done season 1 was, I won't be watching seasons 2, 3, or 4. And don't expect to see more videos about the Man in the High Castle. I know that's kind of a depressing note to end on, but I'm going to end the video here. Now, despite how grim I got, I do hope you found this video informative, or at least entertaining. If you did, please leave a like, comment, or consider subscribing. All of these help me in my eternal struggle against the dread Lord Algorithm. Terror be on his name. If you'd like a voice on future subjects, consider joining the Patreon for $1 a month. There's a link below. If you want to just make a one-time donation, there's also a link to a Ko-fi page. Speaking of patrons, I'd like to give a special thanks to my biggest supporter, Big Steve. I hope you enjoyed this dive, man. Next week, I'm going to address something I meant to do earlier, but things kind of mounted up. We're going to talk about the alternative history genre, what is it, and kind of cover some of the history of it. I do hope you'll join me for that, but until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading.